During today's webcast, guest speaker, Forrester Senior Analyst Chris Gardner will share his unique perspective on the mainframe market and an exclusive analysis of the Compuware-commissioned Forrester consulting study conducted recently. He will also highlight which KPIs truly increase quality, velocity, and efficiency of development to drive better business performance. Then, Compuware Senior Product Manager Spencer Hallman will discuss how newly introduced zAdviser leverages inputs and machine learning to help IT leaders continuously measure and improve mainframe DevOps processes and development outcomes. We are extremely pleased to have as our guest speaker Forrester Senior Analyst Chris Gardner and Compuware Senior Product Manager Spencer Hallman join us today. With that, I'd like to now welcome and hand things over to Chris.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here today. First off, let me just start with some credentials really quick. I came from a world that was very large on mainframes. I had worked in a very large insurance company for a long time, but I was also transitioning a lot of folks before I became an analyst to the world of DevOps. So increasingly, we're finding these worlds are colliding with each other, and it's not as strange as you might expect. Some folks come to us and say, hey, you know, I thought mainframe is going away and things of that nature, and it's simply not the case. In fact, it's not so much the platform, but the processes and the tools and the metrics around these things that drive delivery. So we're going to go over a couple things. I'm going to give a very brief State of the Union on mainframe as far as Forrester's concerned. Then a focus on need for speed. Essentially, what are our clients telling us about DevOps? What are their challenges? What are they running into? Next, we're going to go into the study itself, the impact on the mainframe workforce and the KPIs that are needed to measure that workforce going forward when you have a DevOps mindset. And then finally, some recommendations. So to start off, mainframe use is growing. It's not shrinking. This surprises some people. When we ask our clients, you know, are you building out or are you scaling back mainframe usage? They're actually increasing it. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is business critical applications have always lived on mainframe. That's not going away. Increasingly newer applications are starting to run on mainframe, things like blockchain and containerization. It turns out mainframe is really good for those workloads. So the combination of those two things have led to increased investment. And people have realized that mainframe can be just as much a part of the hybrid environment that you're working in as typical VMs or physical servers on premises, as cloud services that are reachable through APIs. It's part of a holistic chain. When we look at development, we see that overall, mainframe development is in sync with just about everything else in terms of mobile web apps, software containers, quality assurance applications. Right now, it's not shrinking. There's just as much development and effort being put into mainframe development as just about any other kind of platform today. So just to summarize the State of the Union, what we're seeing is that as folks are moving towards making sure that mainframe is a first-class citizen when it comes to development, they're increasingly tying it to DevOps initiatives. Tools like Compuware provides and also a bunch of other vendors enable that. It also enables change in processes. So it's not so much the impact of the platform anymore, it's how you're able to deliver applications across the board. You're subject to the same business demands. I think this is an obvious statement to make, but just because you're running a business critical application doesn't mean that you need to not focus on velocity, efficiency, and quality. In fact, those things become even more critical. And obviously, CIOs and C-level folks, they focus on results. They don't necessarily focus on platforms. In fact, to be frank, you probably don't want them focusing on platforms. You want them focusing on the products, the deliverables, and how well you're actually reaching your customers in terms of customer experience. So let's talk about this speed element. Obviously, it probably goes without saying that velocity has our clients' full attention. When we ask our executives, if we ask directors and managers, you know, what's on your mind when it comes to delivery, 9 times out of 10, it's velocity. It's how quickly can I update applications? How quickly can I manage the back end so that I'm treating it as infrastructure as code, that I'm doing more frequent release cycles? How often is a change getting into people's hands that is a quality change? Am I getting an application out to a customer that is problematic in some cases? So overall, people are incredibly focused mostly on the velocity element when we talk to folks. However, they're dissatisfied. 64% of all the businesses we talk to are incredibly dissatisfied with release velocity. Part of that is just simple low dissatisfaction. They don't like the amount of time it takes to release and update applications. And when I say applications, I also mean infrastructure as well, because increasingly those things are tied together. 42% are upset with manual approvals. I'm surprised this is not higher. Most of the organizations that I talk to have a very manual change lifecycle. They still convene the change advisory board. They still get folks, 20, 30, 40 people on a call. And that leads to process inefficiency, obviously. You would think that automation would improve and take over some of this, and it's started to. But we're still seeing a lot of folks go the old-fashioned way and try to treat every change as a critical change. And lastly, 66% lack of automation tools. Now, I want to draw some clarity to this. It doesn't mean that they don't have automation tools. In fact, most enterprises we talk to have a number of automation tools already in place. However, they're not holistic. They'll have configuration management in one section of the organization. They'll have continuous integration in another section. They'll have continuous delivery, release automation in another section. And what we tend to find is that you have islands of automation. You have multiple tools that are doing the same thing in different areas. So you'll have Chef in one part of the organization and Puppet in the other. And one of the first things we often bring to people when they have to do a rationalization exercise around this is to ask, what is actually being used? Because quite frankly, most enterprises don't know what automation is already being leveraged in their organization. And this leads to a maturity difference. When you look at the various verticals and you look on the dimensions of culture and process, release velocity, and automation tools, and you ask the DevOps professionals themselves the state of things, you tend to find that certain industries such as utilities and telecommunications are actually better at this based off of automation and release velocity versus, say, public sector and healthcare. Part of this is due to governance. Part of this is due to regulations. However, you'll see here that financial services are not that far behind, and they're one of the most heavily regulated industries around. So what we tend to find is that it's a combination of these factors that leads to the maturity, and most folks are not that mature, and that's okay. It's okay to recognize where you currently stand. If we look at it as a scale, from level 1 to 5, and we talk to every enterprise and we say, where do you think you are right now in terms of maturity when it comes to trust between org units, accountability, customer focus, tools and processes, metrics? Most are a 2 or a 3, and that's okay. It's okay to know that you're a 2 or a 3. If you're a 1, you probably should be very concerned. There's not a lot of 5s out there. The 5s are the unicorns. If I had to liken this to, say, how secure you are, the NSA is like a level 5. You don't need to be a level 5 necessarily. You want to be 1 better than what you currently are, right? So if you're a 2, you want to get to 3, and if you're 3, you want to get to 4. And part of how that's going to happen is by focusing on the right KPIs and metrics, getting the right automation tools in place, building out the right organization that leverages integrated product teams to push DevOps to its full potential. So we did a study with Compuware on this specific topic, and we focused not on DevOps as a whole or application development as a whole, but mainframe DevOps, the folks that are doing development on the mainframe. What are you measuring? What do you think is important to measure? What would you like to measure? What do you think is the business outcome of these things? And we've had some very interesting results. Now, before I start, I want to go into the approach, and I'm not going to go over this entire thing, but every time we do a thought leadership paper of some sort, we come into it with a hypothesis, an assumption of what we expect to see. It's not often that the hypothesis is completely wrong, but we often find that certain things may be off a little bit. In this case, we were pretty much dead on with the hypothesis. It turns out that what we predicted and expected is in line with the data to a degree, and I'm going to go into that because the devil's in the particulars here, and those particulars are very interesting because it shows what folks are actually spending their energy on and what they should probably be spending more energy on. So we, from a demographic standpoint, polled mainframe folks. Now, to be clear, everyone was involved in mainframe. We didn't want to be involved with, if they had some relationship to the process of mainframe, they were part of this study. If they had nothing to do with mainframe, they weren't included. You find there was pretty good distribution of company size. Most of the folks were between 1,000 and 5,000 employees. We had a mix between the U.S. and Europe. And if you asked folks, what department they're in, it was a combination of things. Technically, IT is kind of the one that people put themselves in if they don't really have a more specific category. But you have here enterprise architecture, applications development strategy, and operations itself. And when we start to look at the data itself, we see
Chris,
some correlation. Yes.
One of the things that I was really impressed with the survey was the different number of industries this came across. I was expecting us just to get insurance companies and banks responding to this. And I believe it was something around 16 different industries we got responses from.
Yeah, absolutely. We got retail, we got finance, we got I think we got manufacturing as well. We got a really good representation. And, credit to the Forrester survey team for reaching out and finding the right folks for this. It isn't just one set of industries. And I think it speaks well to that heat map that we were talking about earlier that, people have this presumption, I think, sometimes that mainframe is more prevalent in certain industries than others. And it is more prevalent, but it isn't only in those particular industries. But that's an excellent point, Spencer. Digging into the data, we found that a correlation between what we see from our technographics data, which is that mainframe use is increasing, and the impact that it has on critical workloads. So we found that more than half of businesses run critical workloads on mainframe today, but in 1 year, it's going to increase from 57% to 64%. So people are putting more and more weight into this. They're not just approaching it as a stable platform that I'm not going to touch. They're realizing that more and more applications rely on mainframe from a business of record standpoint, from a criticality standpoint. However, this is something we expected to see, and it's a negative. People are losing folks. Out of the folks that we spoke to, 23% had lost some manner of their mainframe workforce in the last 5 years, and 63% of that had not replaced those folks, which is pretty dramatic. And, it's not totally uncommon. We're seeing this trend across the industry. But, Spencer, I think you had some thoughts about these numbers and what you're seeing at Compuware.
Yeah, it's definitely a concern for us at Compuware, and even a concern for me personally. Basically, for every 3 people lost, 2 aren't being replaced. But I feel that one of the things that's happening is that a lot of the manual processes that were done in the past are now being automated. So companies truly need fewer people to run the mainframe. I think that explains part of why some of the people aren't being replaced. But I think the other half might be that, and I know we talk a lot about this at our customer advisory councils every year, is that it's tough for industry to find people to replace people in the mainframe, developers. If they're going to take someone that graduated last week from college with a computer science degree and put them down in front of a 3270 emulator, they're not going to want any part of that. And so what these companies really, I think, need to do is put modernized interfaces in front of them, like our Topaz development platform. It's built on Eclipse. It's a platform that these kids have been using, since probably they were in high school. And then the idea of having to develop in COBOL, and we say at Compuware a lot, code is code. COBOL isn't much different than Java. There's still loop structures. There's still the assignment of variables. It's just sort of a different syntax.
Absolutely. And familiarity, like you were mentioning, breeds results. If you have folks that come into your organization that are familiar with certain IDEs, and you put them in front of an IDE that's very similar, they're going to automatically be able to deliver faster. It's akin to if you're hiring somebody, right? If you want somebody that has some experience with the technologies you have. And unfortunately, a lot of folks don't necessarily have technological experience with mainframe itself coming out of colleges, but they have experience with the development platforms. And I want to go back really quick. Something you mentioned very important. There is a percentage of these folks that are getting replaced by automation. It's usually folks that do commodity tasks. It's the folks that sit there and kind of just watch the batch processes. It's not typically the folks that are doing the automation itself, and it's not typically developers. It's typically operations folks that are kind of, for lack of a better term, watching the blinking lights and making sure they continue to blink.
Right.
Now, if we dig a little deeper, I want to mention just a quick summary before we go, actually. Mainframe workload is increasing. We talked about this. Mainframe processing is critical to customer-facing applications. Firms are losing folks, and they're experiencing challenges. So let's talk about KPIs. I think KPIs is a critical measure needed to help fight off some of the talent issue, to help drive more efficiency under the hood, and to help have folks that are coming into the organization deliver as quickly as possible. When we ask people what's important to track, overwhelmingly they said that it's extremely important to track application quality, which is not a bad thing. You want the applications to work, right? Especially on a mainframe, that's a critical, system. However, even though the overall totals of efficiency and velocity were important, they weren't as important. They were considered to be less critical overall. And you're going to see this extend further, where if you ask folks, what performance indicators does your organization currently measure and want to measure, increasingly, people do not measure today velocity and speed of mainframe development or efficiency of the development team. They claim they could, but they're not currently. They're overwhelmingly focused on application quality. And why is that? Partly because application quality could be determined through testing easier and automation easier, right? So certain tests can be done to weed out potential bugs before it gets to the customer. And again, I'm not saying that application quality is a bad metric. It's an excellent metric. But this is imbalanced, especially as you're heading towards a DevOps world, which I mentioned earlier is increasingly velocity-driven. And if we dig a little deeper and say, to what extent has reduction in the workforce actually impacted these things, interestingly, the largest impact has been application quality. So even though folks have had an overwhelming focus on this, they believe up to 16% believe that has the largest impact when they lose people. And they're not as focused on the efficiency of development team as a large impact, but overall, they feel like it has an impact later on. So let me break this down. If you lose somebody, most enterprises are worried about efficiency down the road. They're worried about velocity relatively soon. They're worried about quality right now, which is interesting to me. I would think that these should be relatively even, and they're not. So overall, I mean, this is not that different than what I expected, but it definitely is unbalanced and leaning in one direction versus another. And the value of quality is clear. However, folks are overwhelmingly focused on quality. When we dig even deeper, what are you actually measuring? Number of defects, time to resolve defects, time to detect defects. Great, awesome. But are you measuring number of epics and stories? Are you measuring the amount of time that people are automating their own processes? Are you measuring the time to change things? They are, but they're not as well focused on these things, which to me represents a concerning thing of, okay, you wanted to deliver a quality customer experience in a speedy manner, but you're only focusing on one piece of the QVE, which is something that I think most people should be able to address by balancing out their KPIs. And we have evidence from the paper itself that you will get benefits from focusing on particular KPIs. So if you were to focus on measuring quality output, measuring quality, velocity, and efficiency, you will experience better quality output, higher performance of application, higher availability of applications. Now today, people do not necessarily report that they have a tremendous reduction in customer discovered defects. I was surprised by this because you would think if you're focused heavily on quality that this should be relatively low, and it's not, which means that perhaps some of the KPIs that they are measuring in terms of quality aren't the right ones to measure.
Yeah, I know when we first started this journey, obviously quality is an easy thing to measure, but, the other product managers working with me on this, the first thing we did was we sat down with our vice president of engineering and talked to him about KPIs and what he looked for, what was he doing today. And he said the number one thing that he looks at on a daily basis is the number of customer-generated, bug tickets. To him,
right.
That's his canary in the coal mine.
And not every enterprise does that. Sometimes they have quality metrics that have kind of sprung up over the years from the thoughts and principles of the infrastructure and operations organization that certain things should be measured, when the reality is that those customer-driven metrics are the most important when it comes to quality. You can knock out a bug, but if a bug remains that still impacts the user experience, then you haven't really done your job. So when we ask people, what benefits do you expect to see from focusing on key performance indicators, they increasingly say they want to improve better customer experience, they want to increase speed to market, they want to be able to better respond to digital demands. So all the things you would expect. What I found interesting, though, is the reverse of these two things. So people say they want a better customer experience on the upper right, but they have gotten the lowest level of reduction in customer discovered defects. They're not finding the customer defects. People say they want to increase speed to market in the upper right, but they're not focusing on the efficiency and velocity of their development team. So it's interesting to kind of note that the business benefits that people are expecting from measuring KPIs are not in tune with what they're actually measuring. And this is the whole point of this webinar, is to rebalance what you're focused on, not just focus on the quality metrics, but to focus on the velocity and efficiency as well. So to sum it up, the current focus on most people's minds when it comes to metrics, KPIs on the mainframe, is on defects and quality. But to stay competitive, firms must focus on mean lead time, number of stories and epics, and also just the pure DevOps experience, the development experience. Measuring the right KPIs will drive the technical performance that drives the business performance. And ultimately, this is what you're really capturing, right? If you focus on just the technical elements of this, you're doing your business as a service. So with that in mind, what should you be focusing on? What are the recommendations that we gave in the paper, and what are the recommendations that Forrester gives in general about this? You need to focus on the metrics that matter. So when we're talking velocity, which again is an underrepresented metric in the study, what we want people to focus on are putting quality releases in the customer hands. When you look at it from a DevOps perspective, you want to have the percentage of automation being tracked on release and deployment. You want to capture mean time to defect detect. You want to capture mean time to approve releases. Again, this is an interesting thing that people don't realize sometimes, the difference between process time and cycle time and the impact it has on their metrics. They assume that deployments take the amount of time they do because that's the way it's always been, versus actually measuring these things out and doing a process engineering exercise. When you do these things, they impact the business directly. You're increasing the frequency of customer usable releases, you're increasing the time, and you're making lower the cost per release, and you're increasingly taking away the role of the customer as a bug detector, which is not what they were expecting to be. That's what you have QA and automation for. The other metrics that you should focus on, if you are focusing on quality from a DevOps perspective, you should be focusing specifically on deployment failure rate. You should be focusing on incident severity, and you should be focusing on change success and failure rate. When it impacts the business, they'll find that you'll have better mean time to recover and a better customer experience. And again, most folks are focused on these things. I would just make sure you apply the DevOps lens to this. And lastly, efficiency. From a DevOps team perspective, whether it's mainframe or just other kinds of applications, you want to focus on deployment frequency, duration, the incident severity, and the average time spent in the provisioning environment. If you change one line of code, how long does it take to go from dev to test to production? And what this means for the business is that you'll be detecting unplanned work rate and the happiness of the CX team with technology delivery. How happy are the customers, and how much is that leading back to your work? So this was the study we did. I think we got some excellent data, and it is available for you folks. And I'm going to hand it over to Compuware to go over some of the things that they offer in this space.
Thanks, Chris. So how do we define success? So to know if we're successful, we need some sort of scoreboard that tells us how we're doing. So let's take, for example, a baseball team. So until they actually play a game, we have no idea how good that team is or how good the individual players are. More importantly, we don't know what the strengths or weaknesses are. So we're not tracking anything. But if and when they do play, if all we have is the final score, again, we still don't know if they're good, who the good players are, or who the poor players are, or who's likely to get on base or who's likely to strike out. If we, look back, 10, 15 years ago, the Oakland A's, they had a limited amount of resources to compete with the rest of the league. And so every free agent they signed had to be able to do what they want. They had to be right every time on those signings. And if you saw the movie Moneyball or you read the book Moneyball, the A's determined, one of the KPIs that they found really effective was on base percentage. It was a more telling statistic than batting average. So players with a high on-base average tended to take more pitches, and by taking more pitches, that leads to the team being more successful. It didn't matter how that person got to first base, just that they got to first base. So now that today the A's look much deeper than just on base percentage, but the idea is that they're willing to start playing games. They won't know how the team is going to perform. So if they just sit in spring training forever, they'll never be able to compile meaningful statistics about what works and what doesn't. And mainframe development's in a similar situation. If there's no scoreboard for mainframe development needs a scoreboard and needs a deep set of statistics to be able to tell what they're doing well and what they could be doing better. So mainframe development needs to be able to measure to be able to improve. And continuous improvement involves continuously challenging mainframe development, and that means often taking ourselves out of our comfort zones and pushing harder to stretch that single into a double. So to do this, we need a set of KPIs, key performance indicators, that measures the success of mainframe development. So the likes of Google, Amazon, Facebook, Netflix, amongst others, are already doing this today. They're capturing those KPIs of their different development teams, identifying areas for improvement that allow them to go faster and deliver better code. And there's no good reason why mainframe development can't do this, except for the reason of apathy. But maybe that's a discussion for a different day. Now today, we're here to talk about a free solution for Compuware and its customers that we've brought to the market called zAdviser. So this tool is going to capture DevOps data around quality, velocity, and efficiency while using machine learning to look for correlations in the KPIs and the customer's usage of our tools. So Compuware will set benchmarks for customers' dev teams to not only compare themselves, but to compare themselves to the Compuware benchmark to give them an indication how good they really are. So let's take a closer look at zAdviser. So customers are going to supply us with data on how our tools are being used. So this is data that customers are already sending us today, and they have been actually sending it to us for over 15 years. So I think it's unique in the industry, and maybe you've already been participating with us, and we call it our VIP program, and we're transitioning that to zAdviser. But customers are also sending us data on other tools as well, their SCMs and their ITSM tools like Jira, ServiceNow, or Remedy. And for SCMs, tools like ISPW, Endeavor, ChangeMan. And those are some of the tools that we're already getting data from our customers today for zAdviser. So this data is giving us the information we need to tell us how often they're promoting code, the mean time to resolution for a bug, how long it's taking to fix a bug, amongst other things, and we're calling that our DevOps data. However, the keystone for zAdviser is machine learning, and this is what's going to set it apart in the marketplace. So the input of the DevOps data, we're going to be able to look for correlations in the Compuware tool usage data. So customers who are very good at mainframe development, promote often, for example, might find certain features in our tools that help them go faster. So, for example, and this is a hypothetical way this might work. Let's say one customer promotes new features at the rate of 200 per month. And the ISPW usage data shows that the vast majority of those promotions are coming through the use of an API. Now, we won't know specifically what tool is calling that API, but we'll know that that API is being called from an external tool such as Jenkins or one of our other partners such as Zebia Labs. So that might be one of our recommendations to our other customers to help them go faster, is that if you automate your code promotion process, you can go faster. So we might find customers that use a particular command and expediter experience fewer bugs in productions, or they have a shorter time to develop a resolution to a bug. So we might provide some prescriptive action for the developers to watch a short vignette to become better, faster, and more effective developers. So these are the set of KPIs that we're looking at initially with zAdviser. So we're going to be tracking, again, efficiency, velocity, and quality. And under each heading, you can see the initial set of KPIs that we'll be looking to track. So these KPIs were developed in conjunction with long discussions with Forrester and our customers about what made the most sense initially to track. So if you think back to our baseball analogy, these are the statistics that we're going to track for our customers' development teams. We're also going to be able to set benchmarks of all this data to show customers not only how well they're doing, but how they compare to the world. So if you think about it, let's think about the number of abends or defects trapped versus abends that escape KPI above. So abends that are trapped are abends that are found in development or test, and abends that escaped are ones that get out to production. So all the data may say for a particular customer that 90% of their bugs are found in development, QA, or test, which would mean that 10% are found in production. Your KPI may show 90%, but when we show the Compuware benchmark, we might show 85% or 95%. So you can see that, wow, in terms of the world, you're doing pretty well, or there may be some work that you need to do. So these next two slides are a couple screenshots from zAdviser, and some of you may recognize the interface we're using. So we made a decision to standardize on the ELK stack, and this is a tool from a company called Elastic. So it comprises 3 products: Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana, which is where you get the term ELK. And what you're currently looking at is the Kibana dashboard. Kibana is what we use to visualize the data that's captured. So right here we have 3 KPIs identified, and if you look at the rightmost visualization, you can see we've overlaid the KPIs with Compuware usage information. So you can start to see how Compuware products were being used over time and how the usage related to that KPI. So as we go forward, our data scientists will be looking for correlations in the usage of the features and functionalities of the KPI. He's going to be answering the questions about what causes improvements to the KPIs and what may have a negative impact on the KPIs. We're also able to give benchmarks based on all the data on your KPIs compared to the world. So the last screenshot, this is the last screenshot, but what I wanted to point out on this slide is that we created another KPI, and this is the number of bugs captured daily. And this is something that I mentioned earlier that our Vice President of Engineering is really keen on. And so if the raw data is available, our customers are going to have the ability to create their own KPIs. They're going to be able to explore the data any way that they want and create their own dashboards. It's something that we're going to put in front of them. So we'll give you a set of dashboards out of the box to show the KPIs, and if you want to create additional dashboards, that's something that you'll be able to do. So with that, I wanted to let you know about the brief survey opportunity that will be available towards the end of this webcast. We value your feedback and would appreciate responses, and by completing the survey, you'll be entered into a drawing to win a $50 American Express gift card. So with that, we're going to open it up for the questions. So the first question, I'm going to be the moderator question and help Chris answer some of them.
Yep.
So first of all, why do you think people focus more on quality than velocity and efficiency?
Yeah, so I think it's, we mentioned this a little bit, but to go a little deeper, I think the reason is because it's easier, quite frankly. It's easier to find fault in a mathematical model. It's easier to find an issue with something that's broken. It's not as easy to figure out the velocity and efficiency of a team. And I think what you guys are doing with zAdviser, again, along with some other vendors, is a great way of measuring that. I tend to find people come to me and say, well, I can't actually capture these things. No, you can. You can actually capture the performance of your team and go beyond just the quality of the code. So, I think, again, it's not as easy to do, but it is possible. And I think Compuware, Spencer, you feel the same way, right?
Yeah, I absolutely. And, our Vice President of Engineering, the thing that he's going to get the most calls on is quality. So if I don't believe we have a quality problem, or, our code is bad quality, I think it's very good. But if quality tends to suffer, that's the first thing that he's going to get a call on.
Right.
Customers aren't going to call us on velocity and efficiency. They're going to call us on quality. And that is something that, is job one here at Compuware.
Yep. Makes sense.
So the next question we have is, do you find that organizations are not wanting to pay for this level of quality because they are skeptical of the value proposition? And I think this goes back to the slide about the 64% of businesses dissatisfied with release velocity. And if I could pull that slide up. Hold on. So, feeling I get here is that customers want to go faster, they just don't know how. And I think we talked somewhat about this, but I think there's a lot of internal bureaucracy that prevents them from going faster. And in some instances, they're really stuck in some of these outdated waterfall development processes on the mainframe. I know on the mainframe, the one thing that people are really hyper-focused on is the 5 nines. So in the mainframe, that the mainframe is up 99.999% of the time. I think others want to go faster and add innovative process, but sometimes they're rowing against the tide. You talked about those, the change advisory boards where there's 20 people on a bridge line, approving changes. Sometimes I can imagine that being really slow. What's your thoughts, Chris?
Yeah. I think there's, going to the value proposition part of the question, I think that people miscalculate the value proposition. And what we tend to find, or I tend to find, is that around business critical systems in particular, a lot of enterprises have this approach of why pay one time when I could pay two for twice the price? They'd rather almost overspend, and they don't really care about the value proposition when it comes to quality on these platforms, which is kind of silly when you think about it. Some of these platforms are the most expensive platforms you're going to own. So I think there's a miscalculation with the efficiency and velocity of the DevOps team actually having an impact on your value prop. I think people are realizing now that it's not enough to simply throw money at the run part of this run-grow equation. And you need to focus just as much on the team deliverables and the DevOps aspects of your delivery, whether it's on Mainframe or any other platform.
Right. So that leads to our next question. Is DevOps on the mainframe really possible?
Yeah, so that's an easy answer. Yes. I'll go into a little more detail, but absolutely. It's interesting because when we looked at when we did our continuous delivery release automation wave last year, one of the requirements we had was that you had to do mainframe. You had to be included as part of your platform supported. You had to be able to support DevOps processes and deploying applications across a wide variety of platforms, including mainframe. Some folks who did not meet that criteria ended up scoring very poorly in the wave, but these criteria are informed by customer needs, and increasingly folks are not wanting to do DevOps up and down the chain with containers, with serverless, with VMs, with bare metal infrastructure as code, and then leave mainframe as out of the equation. So the answer is yes, it is possible, and yes, people are doing it.
And I think they need to do it. I mean, if you have a distributed team that's going really fast, and then you run up against the mainframe team that says, okay, well, we're in a 6-month release cycle, it's just things are just going to come to a grinding halt.
Exactly. Absolutely true.
So that's the end of our questions, Chris. Janet, I'm going to flip it back to you.
Great. Thanks, Spencer. Thanks, Chris. That was a great presentation. For those questions that we didn't have time to get to, we definitely will follow up directly after the broadcast. So we want to thank you again for attending today's webcast. And as always, feel free to reach out with any of your questions directly. With that, I'd like to conclude today's presentation. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.